Showtime! Welcome to the show. I'm Brent Holland, and welcome, one and all, to Night Fright. I can only say one thing as I'm looking at my guest across the way, all the way in Sudbury, Ontario. He's back! Michel Deschamps is back, folks. We're going to be looking at UFOs from Canada all night long, sightings and interceptions and near misses and all kinds of wild stuff that goes on in Canada. And you guys thought Canada was this calm, gentle little place. Nothing could be further from the truth. And I'd like to point out two aliens that have been found out just recently. Justin Bieber and, of course, our very own Rob Ford. And I'm just kidding on those last two, by the way, folks. Get the coffee going, get the tea going. Get a beverage of your choice going, settle in, relax. It's going to be an explosive show. Michel Deschamps, folks, is the MUFON director for Northern Ontario. He's been investigating UFOs in Canada for 25 years, Michel? I don't want to date you, my friend.
First of all, I'm no longer a member of MUFON.
Oh, you're not? Okay, we'll get into that in a second.
No. Yep. I'll explain why. And then, no, it's actually, oh my God, I got involved, well, with an official UFO group, of course, MUFON since 91, but I've actually been researching UFOs for 40 years, and I'm going to be 50 this year. So, yeah, at age 10 I started. I had my first sighting at age 9.
Wow, that's incredible. Well, what was that first sighting, Michel?
A spherical object, seemingly made metallic in appearance, with the sun reflecting off its upper right portion. I sketched that sighting that I had. It's under my personal sightings page on my website, which is www.newforest.com. New Forest each letter stands for the first letter of these following words: Northern Ontario UFO Research and Studies. New Forest, NOUFORS. And I found recently I guess it's Photoshop, somebody made a rendition of something similar, and it was the perfect example of visually of what it was that I actually saw. So in comparison to my sketch, it actually looked better, so I've actually placed that image next to my sketch that I had done.
So people can go there and see it right away.
Yeah.
Wow, that's fascinating. Can you describe it to the audience that's listening?
Well, I recently went to the area where this happened, and I took a photo. There's houses built there now, but back then, it was at the end of our street in Hanmer, because I grew up most of my life. I grew up in Hanmer, which is 20 miles north of Sudbury. It's a fair-sized town. It's spread out a lot, just as spread out as Sudbury is, I guess. It was July of '74. And it was pretty well around my brother's birthday, because his birthday is July 13th. And my mom usually would ship us outside to go do something, instead of being cooped up in the house on a nice summer day, which I always like to do. She shipped us off at the end of the street where we used to have, they've redone everything now, but we used to have a hockey rink, and there was a 2-story building there, I wouldn't say a shack, but it was big enough where the main floor, the kids were sent there to do finger painting. Nice. And on the second floor, you'd find this rackety wooden staircase where the teenagers would hold their dances, teenage dances. And so we were downstairs finger painting and stuff, and it was a nice summer day. And I looked outside. I was looking out back. I remember seeing one guy playing 21 by himself with a baseball mitt and a baseball and a ball out in the field, in the baseball diamond. And I looked to the south, and I saw this sphere above the tree line, and it was, the sun was shining off of it. And at first I thought maybe it's an advertising balloon, because there was, at that time where the houses are now built, there used to be what looked like a driveway or just a parking lot with a gravel parking lot with an old aluminum shed, or aluminum siding on the shed, and a couple of U-Haul trailers. So that was parked there. Plus, it looked like it had a pole with one of those sock flags, the colored red and white stripes that you find at the airport.
Sure.
So this sphere was hovering next to the flag, the SOC flag. That's why I drew it in the picture. But yet I looked to see if it was tied down or anything, or if it had advertisement on it, and there was nothing. And there was no chain or rope tying it to the ground, so it just hovered there. And I didn't pay much attention. Years after, I thought maybe it was something I copied because I grew up on science fiction films and stuff ever since the lunar landing. That's what got me interested in space in the first place, seeing the actual lunar landing on TV. First man on the moon, 1969. And so I was looking at this object, and for years after that, I thought, well, it's probably something I copied off TV. I wasn't sure if I actually had seen this. But years later, much later, I purchased the microfilm reels from the National Archives.
Here in Canada.
And I found a couple of documents that pertain to the dates of. I also had a Canadian book that I bought in Niagara Falls. When I lived in Niagara Falls for a couple of years, in 87, 88, I went to the local bookstore and I found this Canadian book called UFO Canada. And there's a chapter in there that talks about Sudbury and Eastern Townships, July 12th to 15th, 1974. And that kind of floored me because that sounded similar to the approximate time period where I had seen my sighting. And additional to that, other people were seeing these bluish, whitish spheres moving around Sudbury and Hanmer, but there was also a CP air flight just taken off from Montreal a few hours earlier. And as it flew over Sudbury, it had to take an evasive maneuver on two separate occasions because there was a 100-foot diameter saucer in its path.
Oh, my God. And this is documented.
This is documented in the book, but not in the documents themselves. And apparently all the passengers were told to look out the one side of the plane, I guess, looking north, and they saw the object. The object moved out of the way, or the plane, I should say, actually moved out of the way, because they thought they were going to have a mid-air collision, and there's been several instances of cases like that. So it was pretty neat to find out that during the time that these little whitish, bluish spheres, mine seemed to be at least a meter in diameter. So it's not that small. It's not beach ball size. It's more of slightly bigger than that. But while that was happening down below, here was this encounter with a jetliner and a UFO, and a 100-foot diameter UFO.
Now, I just want to orientate people, too, because in that era, folks, we're looking at the Cold War. In Sudbury at the time, it was part of our northern defense. There was a huge, huge base there, a radar base, and they would pick up UFOs all the time and scramble aircraft there to meet them. Michel, do you know if they did this in this particular case, where aircraft scrambled to intercept, so to speak?
I'm not sure about that particular case. I mean, there's a good possibility. As far as the objects lowered to the ground, probably not, because they were probably below the radar line. I don't know exactly how low the bottom part of the radar line actually extends to, but I know that one radar technician had called me once, and pertaining to an incident that took place a year later in 1975, where there was like radar tracking. Actually, there had been radar trackings of UFOs like before then too, but I know that the radar technician who called me, he admitted that he had worked on the base, and he was there to make sure the instruments were properly calibrated and they were not defective. And they said that the radar beam could not go any lower. Well, it could go any lower. It could go lower. But the only thing is, any UFOs that are below that certain bottom of that radar line would be lost in ground clutter, which means that the radar could also pick up buildings or trees or whatever, but they had to be careful not to do that. The 75 incident was part of a larger encounter or a session of intrusions upon military installations. There were 4 bases. It started basically for us Canadians, it started in July, where sightings were starting to show up on Manitoulin Island. In the States, they started in October, where for weeks, 2 to 3 weeks, there were sightings or intrusions of UFOs over military installations. There was sightings, objects sighted over Loring Air Force Base in Maine, Wurtsmith Air Force Base in Michigan, Minot Air Force Base in North Dakota,
wow,
and Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana. And Falconbridge Radar Base, located near the airport in Hanmer, was the 5th installation that was being intruded upon at the same time period. I have documents that cover all 5 military installations.
Now, in my mind, Michel, all these military bases are working together, right? It's all part of what was it called? Not NATO. It was part of the DEW line, I think.
North American Defense Commission. Yeah, NORAD.
NORAD, there we go. And
yeah.
So this was, I mean, for these places to be on high alert, obviously they thought something was afoot. Perhaps the Russians were coming across the pole for a sneak attack. So it's no wonder that the tensions were very, very, very high. We're speaking with Michel Deschamps, folks. I was going to say MUFON director for Northern Ontario, and I'm going to find out in just 1 second why he's not a member of MUFON anymore. He lives in a place called Sudbury. Michel was my very first guest on Night Fright, going back to July 2nd, I'll have you know. 2008, Michel came on the show, my very first one in Sudbury, broadcast out of the Laurentian University CKLU radio station there. And he's been a great friend ever since, and a great asset and wonderful supporter of this show. Michel, what happened there? How come you're not part of MUFON anymore? First of all, let's tell the folks what MUFON is.
Well, the Mutual UFO Network was at that time based in Seguin, Texas. Now I believe it's in Denver, Colorado. What happened was basically I was a member from 91. The reason why I became a member in the first place is because I had collected or put together this easy access book that I'd started in high school. I was getting reports, UFO reports from fellow students and also some of my teachers. And I had started at an earlier age actually collecting reports the moment I heard the term flying saucer in 1974, 75 when Project UFO was on the air on TV. That's when everything's really started happening for me. And so I put together the TV Access book, and I said to myself, what the hell am I going to do with all this information? So when I got to put myself in contact with Stanton Friedman, a nuclear physicist, and of course the grandfather of Roswell, the one who's located all the witnesses, or most of the witnesses to the Roswell incident.
And a Canadian, by the way, folks, and www.nightfrightshow.com. You'll find lots of Stanton Friedman shows there, as well as Michel Deschamps shows there. Sorry, Michel.
Yeah, that's okay. So I told him, I said, I've got all this information, and what should I do? He says, well, don't do it just because I'm one of the chairpersons, but you might want to think about joining MUFON. So I proceeded to do that, and in 91, I started buying some of the videotapes that were available and some T-shirts and the Field Investigator's Manual, which I still have. And that's how it started. Now, over time, I realized, and it's in the MUFON's mandate as well, that they wanted to solve the mystery. It seemed to me that they wanted to solve the mystery of UFOs for themselves. And I said to myself, well, if you're sitting on information, it'd be best to actually go to school, start going in schools and educating people about it, because there's no use complaining that nobody else is on the same page if you're not going to be educating them so that you can bring them up to be on the same page. So that was one of my reasons why I was thinking of distancing myself from MUFON, but also because there was a glitch or miscommunication when it came to my renewal for my subscription, and it seemed like the amount had jumped quite a bit from what it was annually, and so as a result, I didn't renew my membership in 2010, And I kind of missed the monthly journal, but there was a miscommunication, and by then it was already too late. I'd already made my decision, and I have to admit, frankly, that I've been able to do a lot more on my own than if I was with the UFO group, because I did not feel at the time that they were doing an awful lot to educate the public.
Fair enough.
That they were sitting on a lot of information. Even my original report that I had sent in, I filed an original report that I had witnessed, and I have the video as well. And it took me almost 3 to 4 years to get it back because it was in somebody's closet, not being used for anything.
Wow. So obviously they're under probably support constraints as well as everybody else, probably financially as well, right through down to manpower. Now, Michel, you've got this wonderful resource online, newfours.com. And folks, www.nightfrightshow.com. As always, click on tonight's guest's picture. That'll take you right to his website, where you can have a glance at this masterpiece of a website. It's the best bilingual website on UFOs in the world, bar none. It's in English and French. Michel is fluently bilingual. He's a Canadian, eh? What can we say? And very proud. And he does incredible work. On one of his pages, and this is going to be the focus of our show for, the next little while anyways, we're going to be discussing all kinds of things UFO. I want to go back to Sudbury as well, because there's a lot more sightings going on there, as well as Ontario and the rest of Canada and right across the world. But for now, I want to talk about Jackie Gleason. When do you hear these names, folks? And they all have something very stunningly in common. You got Jackie Gleason, Sammy Davis Jr., Jimmy Farr, Dick Gregory, Sammy Hagar, Jimi Hendrix, Anthony Hopkins. You've got John Lennon. You've got Olivia Newton-John, Elvis Presley, Keith Richards, Mick Jagger, Will Smith, William Shatner, on and on and on. And Michel, what is that commonality that all the folks I just mentioned have?
They either have had UFO sightings, or they've made a comment about UFOs basically saying that they believe in their existence, or that there's life in outer space other than our own.
I touched on... Okay, let's go right away. Richard Nixon.
Okay, Richard Nixon. Because separate from the celebrities in UFO page, I also have politicians in UFO page. I'm still working on those, adding whatever detail comes across my desk. Grant Cameron out of Manitoba has a website that's called presidentialufo.com, and he deals more directly with the president and what they knew or know about UFOs. As for me, well, I started looking everywhere. It just dawned on me that there was a lot of things that were missing out in terms of what educational tool I could have to show that it's not just, the town drunk seeing a UFO at 3 o'clock in the morning while under the influence. We're talking about people of every walks of life that actually may have seen something,
That's what I'm getting across. Some heavy hitters.
And Jackie Gleason, he's one of the very fortunate few who actually was friends with Richard Nixon, and Richard Nixon, being the president, actually had access. He snuck off one night with Jackie Gleason because he wanted to show him something. And it is believed that he took him to Homestead Air Force Base, which is in Florida. They were both golfing buddies. And Jackie Gleason was a big believer in UFOs and extraterrestrial life. And Nixon took him to a base where he showed him actual alien bodies.
Really?
And years later, his wife actually admitted, after he had passed away, that it's basically true. He was in shock. Jackie Gleason was in shock for almost 4 weeks, if not more than that. It just totally kept quiet.
Just speculation, Michel, but what finally brought this story forward? Did Jackie Gleason bring this story forward? Was it found maybe in Richard Nixon's memoirs or something? How did this story come to the surface?
I believe he told his wife, and his wife was finally interviewed and decided to come clean. I'm not exactly sure on the details,
Fair
but I
enough.
tried to find some information about it, and it looks like it's been mentioned all over the place. So there's got to be some credence to it, and I believe it. You know.
Well, let's follow that back. Okay, so if Nixon knew, I'm going to suspect the president before that, of course, was Johnson because Kennedy was assassinated. How far back would it go that the presidents knew that there was ETs, quote unquote, amongst us? Any speculation?
Right back to Roosevelt and Truman.
That far back?
Yeah.
Wow.
Because Roosevelt, at the time that Roosevelt was president, that's when the famous UFO raid over LA took place in 1942.
Oh, can you tell us about that? You know, I'm aware of Roswell and some of the bigger ones, but I don't know about this one, Michel.
Yeah, well, the what's the word for it? I think it's the LA invasion or UFO battle over LA. That's what it's called. And they've made some stupid movies based on that incident.
Oh, sure. Just
Yeah. But Jose Escamilla, who's a filmmaker, is actually doing a documentary that hopefully will put it in a very good light on exactly what happened. But there's a photo. I think I have it on my website somewhere too, where all these large projector lights that are showing up, they're just scanning the skies because everybody was like pretty well on pins and needles back then for. In 1941, there had been the attack on Pearl Harbor, right?
Right. So
this was the year before. So 1942, the western coast was actually on the lookout for anything intruding upon its mainland, and this object was
picked Japanese attack.
Yeah, and this object was picked up traveling really, really slowly down the coast, and there's a famous picture that was taken where these projector lights actually were shining on this object, and 1,400 rounds of mortar were shot at this thing, and not one ever brought anything down except some people got killed because the mortar would come back down, and it was the famous LA invasion or battle over LA, as they call it. And I found the write-ups in the New York Times. I found the write-ups in I don't know if the Washington Post. I don't think I have the Washington Post at Laurentian, but some of the other papers.
Are you able to describe the craft, the size, and things of that nature?
Well, in the picture, it looks almost like it's typical disc shape with possibly a dome on top, but it's so well lit by the projector lights that it's hard to discern. And plus, UFOs put out so much light sometimes, like brighter than daylight, that it's really hard to make out any structure. Mm-hmm. But the object was never brought down, and that was a surprising thing considering all the firing that was taking place that night. You know,
reminds me of the movie 1941, the old Spielberg movie with I was going to say Dan Aykroyd, his buddy there. Oh my goodness, John Belushi was in it. It was hilarious. I liked the movie.
Oh. I don't think I saw it. But it's I think one of those incidences that is etched forever in those people's mind. Whoever, I doubt there's any survivors today that actually would remember that, but that actually were there. But the states have been on pins and needles ever since the beginning because I was given recently one of the contributors to this particular large book. It's about the size of a phone book. It was donated to me as a gift, and it's UFOs in Government and a historical inquiry. And it basically gives you an idea, a pretty clear idea of, it's a two-sided story. On the one hand, the military was extremely nervous and scared to death and trying to figure out if these things were Nazi inventions or experiments or Russian or something else. And yet while they were scratching their heads and they were terrified, they were practically shaking in their boots. Publicly, they would say there was nothing to these flying saucers whatsoever. That it's atmospheric conditions, mental aberration, psychological, whatever. And so this book actually shows you how we actually were lied to and we have been lied to for a very long time because
what was the official report of that then, Michel? What did the military finally say that was the consensus? How did they explain that?
Well, I didn't finish the book because what it basically goes through all the steps on how each project, how each saucer project was developed. It started with Project Sign, and then it went from there to Project Grudge, which tried to strip away the aura of mystery from flying saucers, which really wasn't successful because even though the military wished that the saucers would simply go away, they weren't going away. People were reporting more. There was more reports by airline pilots coming forward, over time. And then Project Grudge became Project Blue Book. To finally get rid of Project Blue Book, a special committee was put together. There was two different committees. There was the Robertson panel, which was created by the CIA, which had more or less a favorable, I don't know if there was a favorable, idea or opinion on flying saucers, but the other group that really put the last nail in the coffin for Project Blue Book was the Condon report, or the Condon investigation group, and Edward Condon was in charge of that group, and he was already biased. He was already a skeptic, so even though he wasn't supposed to come out with a conclusion a year from the time that the project started, he already had his conclusion in mind. And when this was found out, but some of the insiders in the Condon group, some of them quit in disgust. And basically, when the Condon report came out, saying basically it was nothing to flying saucers and UFOs, and that's what helped to close Project Blue Book.
I see.
It gave somebody else a reason to say, well, we're wasting time and money and effort on investigating something that does not exist. And in the meantime, things were happening all over the place. We have famous cases where Washington, D.C. was overflown in 1952 on 2 consecutive weekends.
Can you tell us
at the same time,
Can you tell us that?
well,
for those that are
there was 12 to 15, I think it was 12 to 15 objects that were tracked on radar. Some planes were sent to intercept the UFOs. As they got on the scene, the UFOs would disappear. As the planes would return back to the air base, the UFOs would reappear. In one instance, a plane actually got to be on site where the UFOs were still there, and 4 UFOs in the shape of spherical objects actually encircled the aircraft as it was flying, and the pilot was basically shitting in his pants, because something like that, you're not accustomed to seeing something like that, and there's been a lot of more reports of pilots being scared shitless going up. Like the more recent case was over Stephenville, Texas. That was one case, and of course during the Phoenix Lights incident, pilots were sent up. One pilot actually had to be helped out of his airplane because he was so much in shock.
He was shaking that much. I'm looking at your celebrity page again, and I noticed Muhammad Ali has had a paranormal experience, a UFO experience. Can you tell us that one?
Well, whatever I found is what's in there. See, some of these celebrities were already on other pages, but they were all spread out. I wanted to put all the celebrities that had been collected on the same page so that everybody would see the amount of people, high-profile stars and movie stars and TV stars and sports figures that actually would come out and say that, we've seen these things. We're not crazy. And
just let me read this then from your website. This is about Muhammad Ali, folks. On one occasion, while driving along the New Jersey Turnpike, a cigar-shaped UFO, how many times have we heard about a cigar-shaped UFO? A lot of times. Passed in front of his car. The object was surrounded by a row of colored lights. His most publicized UFO encounter occurred while he was jogging in Central Park in Manhattan. Talk about heavily populated place. Because I always think of these things, Michel, in some rural area where there's very few people around. During the early hours of the morning, Ali was accompanied by several witnesses, including newspaper reporters and his manager, of course, Angelo Dundee. He first caught sight of the object as it traveled slowly and silently over some nearby buildings. Within seconds, the object was positioned directly above him. It descended until it was only a few thousand feet above the ground. Then a second object suddenly appeared from the opposite direction and approached the first UFO. After a while, the UFOs disappear. Ali believes that the UFOs carried friendly visitors from another world, and it's a quote here at the end. If you look into the sky in the early morning, you see them playing tag between the stars, and that's by Muhammad Ali. That you will find on NUFOR's website, NOUFORS, Northern Ontario UF Research and Study. Easy way to get the link, folks, www.nightfrightshow.com. Just click on Michel's picture. That'll take you right to a spot where you can get right to this wonderful wealth of information he's put together right on the internet. It's all free and in both languages. Si tu parles français, et allons-y. Let's go. Do you have a little story about Dan Aykroyd for us?
Dan Aykroyd, yeah, actually, he actually was interviewed for about an hour. I think I have the documentary. Basically says Dan Aykroyd Unplugged on UFOs, and I was surprised. I was shocked. Actually, he's a MUFON member, but he's a lifetime member, I think, because he donated a lot of money, and for that he gets like a MUFON jacket and a free subscription to the journal, and he's a consultant for Hollywood as well. And he's been into this like for a long time. I mean, you yourself know, you've interviewed his father, I believe, and I've got the book that you gave me about how they grew up in a haunted house, and that's where he got the idea for Ghostbusters.
Yeah, and they used to have seances right in the farmhouse in Sydenham. And Sydenham, folks, I've mentioned this on the show constantly because it's not that far from where I live in Kingston. I just call it just up the road, but it's a secluded farmhouse, and they used to have seances there. The family was seriously into spiritualism, and nothing wrong with that. And this is where he got the idea to do Ghostbusters based on some of his research and what he grew up with. So there you go. Yeah. Fascinating stuff on this website, Michel. Michel, out of all your encounters that you've personally experienced, has there been any that has scared the bejesus out of you? I'll put it that way. You see, I got to tell you, Michel, because you know me, I traveled, I'm from Montreal originally, folks, and we have this thing called the Trans-Canada Highway, which is a 2-lane, unseparated highway built in 1948 that crawls along mountain passes and tipsy-turvies, and it was made in 1948. It's an old back road, essentially, that we still call the Trans-Canada Highway, because indeed you can jump on it in Newfoundland and end up in Vancouver within several days. It will take you across the country, but it's isolated. And I used to travel between Montreal and Sudbury when I was living in Sudbury, traveling back to Montreal along this secluded highway. Let me tell you, the creep factor sets in because you could go an hour and a half without seeing another human being and without seeing any type of structure or anything like that, just rows of trees on either side of this highway and stars. I mean, the stars are just painted in the sky, and it's glorious. But every now and then you'd look up and you'd not feel quite alone. You'd feel this unnerving sensation that perhaps you're not alone and there's something watching you. Have you ever had an experience like that, Michel, where you've wanted just, the skin's crawling? Go ahead, my friend.
Well, don't forget that when you're driving down that highway, you're actually passing through a couple of towns. One is named Chalk River and the other one is called Deep River.
Yes, sir.
And there's a nuclear power plant. There's a nuclear power plant there, or a nuclear refinery. And it was made famous, at least locally, it was made famous in either the late 60s or the early 70s when there was UFO sightings there, too.
Really? I didn't know that. Now you tell me.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've got to come up with this anti-UFO spray or something. You know, they have anti-bear spray.
Oh my God! You'd be using that spray all the way down because there's been sightings in Mattawa. There's been sightings in North Bay.
This is all along
which is 2 hours. Yeah, 2 hours east of here. That's North Bay. North Bay. Don't forget, North Bay also had a lot of sightings in the 50s because, and in during the Cold War especially, we had. It was told to me by a friend of mine from Inco who actually found out from the captain at the radar base that we used to have here in Hanmer that North Bay used to have nuclear missiles.
Really?
They were American armed.
Silos?
Canadian manned. Not silos. They were the Bulmark missiles. Oh. They were nuclear.
Okay.
Yeah.
They were nuclear capable.
They were American armed, but Canadian manned.
And if I'm not mistaken, North Bay was kind of our position for an underground bunker if there was ever a nuclear attack. That's where our continuation of government would go, our COG would go. Now, thank goodness it was never used. But that's kind of scary in its own right. So no wonder it was being investigated, if you will. Now, getting back to what I asked you, Michel, has anything ever scared the bejesus out of you that you've just had a bolt? Because you're a pretty tough guy and you've seen a lot.
I can't say that I've had any, like the heebie-jeebies. I've had more frustration than anything else. I've had camcorders with me. I've had no witnesses in a lot of the sightings I've had, which is frustrating enough because by yourself, who wants to come out and say, well, I've seen something, but okay, you got any proof? No. You got any witnesses? No. So,
yeah, you know. And all of a sudden.
But I think I should have been scared a couple of times. One time I saw something that was no less than maybe a mile away, but it was daytime and I was working at a dealership. So I was outside cleaning the snow off the cars, and I saw this thing across the sky, and I watched it for 15 minutes until it disappeared. It looked like a little cotton ball in the distance. But when I first caught it, it was already halfway through the sky, and it looked like a disc with a plume of smoke or something fishtailing behind it. And this is broad daylight. Another sighting I had, which was less than 500 yards away, the best way I described it, when it was on, and I say when it was on, it was like two light sources. When they were fully lit, and my camcorder couldn't pick them up because they weren't bright enough, they actually looked like sea urchins. It's the best description I could say. That's why I sketched two sea urchin-looking things, but yet flying very low, less than 500 yards from me, and as fast as jets, but not a single sound. I had my back turned to them. And it was told to me by a friend of mine and his girlfriend at the time. They were both walking outside, and they had called me. I was downstairs watching TV at my parents' house where I live. And they said, if you go outside now, there's two objects heading north towards Hanmer from Sudbury. So I got in the car, I drove out, and I had my camcorder with me, and I'm facing east on my favorite hilltop where I could see the radar base in the distance at that time. And then as I panned from the east to the west looking south, then I caught the corner of my eye, I caught these two flashing light sources going right by, and the one in the front was heading towards Capreol faster than the one behind it, and yet there was no sound. If I had turned around at all, I would have never even known they were there.
Did you get them on tape?
And because they were too faint. Even when they came on, they were flashing 7 cycles a second. That's how fast the flashes were. And yet they weren't really bright, so the camcorder couldn't pick that up, even though I had 0 lux on that thing. I could shoot at night. I got the Hale-Bopp comet on with that camcorder. I got a nighttime UFO that I filmed with that camcorder. But those two light sources, that's all I could do was sketch them afterwards. And like I said, they were flying as fast as jets, definitely too low. Like we're talking below 500 feet.
Wow.
At best maybe 60 feet up in the air, because I was on a hilltop and I was looking almost at eye level towards the west as they were going from my left to my right, heading north to Capreol, and yet dead silent.
Did they do anything unnatural in terms of, we see an airplane usually flies in a straight line, right?
Predictable. The the appearance is unnatural. That's what I'm trying to say about UFOs. Some of them may try to disguise themselves as something typical, like light sources and stuff that flicker off and on. But the colors, like the red tinge, may not be exactly right. It will never look the same as those communication towers with the red flashing lights that pulse like a heartbeat. Mm-hmm. They will pulse irregularly, or the lights will have odd colors like amber, pink, sometimes vivid blue or purple, or lime green, which is pretty odd. We don't have anything that has lime green lights on them. The helicopters or planes, sometimes it's a very pale green, almost bluish in color, and then the red light on the other tip of the wing. But these things, the appearance is different, and if it's not the appearance, it's the configuration of lights on them. That's just weird. And the maneuver, objects like that, UFOs, they move sideways. We have nothing that flies sideways. A helicopter can hover sideways, but it makes tremendous noise, at that close proximity.
Yeah, you'll hear them. And there's a vibration.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Folks,
I can hear a plane. I can hear an airliner flying by at 35,000 feet at night. No problem.
Yeah, because there's no ambient. Sudbury, folks, There's no ambient light. There's no ambient sound. So you can hear things far off. You can see things far off. It's got great advantages in terms of things of that nature. Now, just let me read this. This is from also Michel Deschamps' great website called NUFORS, NOUFORS, Northern Ontario UFO Research Study. And this is from Tom Cruise. Of course, being a Scientologist, Tom Cruise believes in aliens. Cruise has famously uttered, "Of course I believe in aliens. Are we really so arrogant as to believe we are alone in the world?" Who could argue with that? That's from Tom Cruise. So there's lots of celebrities on this page, folks, and I'll be quoting from some of them as we go. David Bowie, Daniel Craig, Walter Cronkite, some heavy, heavy, heavy hitters, folks. Michel, the whole UFO phenomenon seems to be coming to a head now. Do you think we're getting closer to disclosure somehow? The closer we get, the further away from it we are? Something along those lines.
Yeah, I think disclosure is going to come about in a different way, or not at all, because I'm finding things out now when I thought I already knew enough about UFOs, that I'm listening to such investigative journalists as Linda Moulton Howe and what she's been able to find out. I mean, some of the stuff already blows my mind, and at the point where I'm listening to some stuff now that I'm posting on my own website because I find those interviews so important for people to listen to, my mind is blown out so far, it'll be hard to recover the brain parts. Because...
Are they here amongst us now, Michel?
I think there is.
Do they walk amongst us? Are there hybrids out there?
There is.
In your opinion?
Yeah, apparently there is. It took me a while to wrap my brain around that one. Also,
is there any way to tell the difference between? I always go back to that the Invaders movie. They were the series of the 60s where the aliens couldn't bend their pinky fingers. I'm making light, but is there anything like that we can discern who is a hybrid, who is an alien, who is from the planet, who is an Earthling, so to speak?
I would hope that there is some slight differences, like maybe the irises, like if you look in their eyes and stuff. Or, some of them might disguise themselves by wearing sunglasses, but if you were to knock them off, maybe you'd see something weird with their eyes that, like a cat's eye or the eyes of a reptile or whatever, with a vertical slit instead of your original, ordinary iris. Or sometimes they may, there's a possibility that some of them may not even have fingerprints. That their fingers are as smooth as the rest of their skin. Or, or the way they speak in a monotone voice, which has been mentioned before. There would be these little odd indications that there's something not quite right with that quote-unquote person.
Have you ever run into anybody personally, Michel, that you feel might...
Oddly enough.
You don't mention their names, for God's sakes. Don't mention their names if you have, but...
I've ran into a few weird people, but I've met a lot of weird people in this town, and I've often said that I think the mothership has made too many stops and dropped them off.
Well, I made a joke before about Rob Ford and Justin Bieber. No, folks, I don't believe they are truly aliens. I was just making that joke. But certainly that destroys any stereotype that you have of Canadians being calm and normal. That's for sure.
Yeah. But no, I've never even had encounters with the real Men in Black, let's say, or like who knows? I mean, I don't even have an infrared camera, and for all I know, there's maybe a hovering, monitoring probe just outside my window that's been hovering there for weeks, and I wouldn't even know unless I had an.
Michel, you bring up a good point. You just mentioned Men in Black, and of course, Will Smith is here in this wonderful page, and I was going to read you what he says. Smith claims to have seen a UFO while driving with a friend, and that's Will Smith. Now, he was in a great movie, of course, 3 great movies called Men in Black. Are they for real, the Men in Black, or is this just some kind of urban legend, do you think?
No, the real Men in Black, this is where, somewhere along the way, the term Men in Black has come to signify whether it's FBI agents or a separate branch of the military that don't have any insignias and they do their own thing under their own auspices or whatever. Mm-hmm. The real Men in Black were what I would say they're either androids created by someone or something to silence people, not meaning kill them off, but the real Men in Black used to be they used to speak in a monotone. They used to wear these black fedoras and black suits, drive mint-condition cars from the 50s and 60s, late models, like Cadillacs and things like that, and sedans. And they would seemingly, they'd come up to a witness, knock on their door, whatever, and the witness may not even have told anybody their story, and yet the Men in Black would know exactly what they saw in full detail and basically threaten them to keep their mouth shut. And that would be it. Then they'd walk off. In some cases, there are some of the investigators like, I forget his first name, Bender. There was one that was Otto Bender, I think, or whatever. He was a researcher, actually, that followed them, or one of the researchers, the early researchers back in the day in the 50s actually followed some Men in Black in a car. And he was not too far behind, and they were riding on this very isolated, deserted road, and they came to a very sharp bend, and as he went around the bend, the car in front of them with the 3 Men in Black completely disappeared out of sight, and there was no side roads or whatever for them to leave or disappear. And it makes you think that maybe they have the capability to metamorph themselves into change themselves into something seemingly like my friend Don Campbell, who's a Minco worker. Once he had 2 encounters with alien beings in 1975. The one encounter that he and his wife actually encountered actually was driving some kind of very advanced futuristic car for the year. The year was 1975. He lived on a very lonely subdivision where 3 homes, including his, were being built. I don't know if the other 2 were already built. And this vehicle pulled up after it followed them up the hill. And yet the car gave off no sound. The being behind the wheel was dressed as if it was trying to disguise itself with a wig and gloves on its hands up on the steering wheel. So he couldn't count the fingers that this thing had. But it rotated its head like a robin when it was heading down the opposite way as they were coming home from a dinner. And so it followed them up the hill, and she wanted to follow this thing because he took down the license plate number. He even had a license plate number on the car, and yet the model itself would have been it would have been like a concept car of today, all of a sudden showing itself in 1975. Because the lines were different, it was more futuristic looking, there was a nearly white glow to the entire car or vehicle. And this being just kept on going, and he wanted to follow it, but his wife, having read some of the articles back then in the Inquirer or whatever, said, no, they're going to take you away, I'll never see you again. And she practically fainted, and he caught her just in time as he saw that he was looking at this car going by. And the license plate number which he took was FLA 600, and at that time he was bowling, him and his wife were bowling with 2 police constables and their wives, and he couldn't come right out and say that he had just seen an alien riding a car. Mm-hmm. So he came up with the story that a drunk driver had gotten in his lane, and he took down the license plate number. And so they did a search, and at that time, there was no such license plate in Ontario in existence.
Wow.
So there's a possibility, a very, very likely possibility that they, not all cases, but sometimes they actually will try to camouflage themselves in something earthly so that we don't pay any attention to them. Or they can go inconspicuously about their business without raising an eyebrow from anybody else who might spot them. So wow. I would not be surprised that men in black were seen driving cars and stuff, but they're not human at all. Now, the men in black today, while people are talking about the, they're driving white SUVs now, the Sentries that work and or stand guard around Area 51, let's say, or some of the black vehicles that are following some certain witnesses that have come out of the ufological closet, let's say, who are under surveillance because their stories may be particularly intense compared to a regular sighting made by, an everyday person.
Understood.
Especially somebody who's ex-military or ex-CIA or ex-DIA comes out. I mean, I'm sure they're followed. Presidents, once their presidents are no longer in power, they still have Secret Service following them because they want to make sure that he keeps his mouth shut.
Big sense, because they're carrying a lot of secrets and stuff, and they've got to protect these people as well. Now, you had mentioned Inco. Yeah. I got to tell folks what Inco is. Sudbury, folks, is a mining city. It primarily mines nickel. It's probably one of the richest nickel belts. It's called the nickel belt in the world. And 2 billion years ago, a meteorite nailed Sudbury, and it all mushed up with organic rock, with rock from outer space and everything, and it created this huge, huge nickel deposits everywhere. So there are deep mines everywhere. There are shafts everywhere. People say that you can't go anywhere in Sudbury without feeling a vibration from one of the trucks deep underground. The reason why I mention that is because there seems to be an abnormal amount of sightings in and around that area. And when we come back, we're going to be taking a break in a few seconds. I want to ask Michel if anything strange has ever occurred with the unearthing, because they're mining all the time, with any unearthing of any strange artifacts or anything along those lines. Folks, we're speaking with Michel Deschamps. Yes, the legend, the man has returned. He's laughing. I can see him in Skype. We're having a lot of fun. Michel, of course, was my first guest when I started Night Fright in Sudbury at CKLU, Laurentian University. I started the show as a lark, and the show has taken off without question. And he's just a great guy. He knows so much about UFOs. He just pulls names and numbers out of a hat just like that, and they're all accurate. He does... he'll go around and give a lecture series. If you're looking for somebody to give a lecture series, a competent lecture series, I should add, on UFOs. He's the real deal, folks. You're not going to get anybody that's just out to make a quick buck here. His website is called newfors.com, NOUFORS.com. And, of course, if you go to the www.nightfrightshow.com website, www.nightfrightshow.com website. There you will find his picture. Just click on his picture. That'll take you right to his website. Now, in his website, as I've said all evening long, he's got celebrities and UFOs, and one of them is right here, William Shatner, fellow Canadian. And Shatner claimed to have seen some sort of shimmering object in the sky while he was pushing his broken-down motorcycle down a road in the Mojave Desert. I'm just trying to picture William Shatner, isn't that funny? William Shatner pushing a broken-down motorcycle in the middle of the Mojave Desert, and this UFO comes over. There's somehow that's poetic irony or poetic justice or something. Michel, stick with us. We're coming up to the break in about 10 or 15 seconds. It's a 6-minute break. Folks, stick around because when we come back, we're going to be looking deep in the minds of Sudbury, Ontario for everything out of the ordinary. I'm Brent Holland from Night Fright. See you in 6 minutes. See you in 6 minutes, Michel. And welcome back, everybody. Welcome to Night Fright. I'm your host, Brent Holland. Welcome back. Looks like we have a caller coming in. Just give me a second, caller, and I shall add you to the call. There we go. Hello, caller. Do you have a question for our guest, Michel, tonight?
No, I have the wrong studio. I'm sorry.
Okay, then. You want to ask a question anyways? I guess not. So, Michel, don't worry about that. Folks, you're listening to Night Fright. I'm your host, Brent Holland, www.nightfrightshow.com. Just click on tonight's guest picture. Take you right to his wonderful, wonderful, incredible website. Michel, before we went away there, and we went really far away, I was going to ask you about the mines, but first I want to read this from Sigourney Weaver, and this is from your site, New Force. After playing Ripley in the sci-fi horror Alien, it's easy to see why Sigourney Weaver is a believer. The film is about a highly aggressive extraterrestrial that hunts and kills the crew of a spaceship. Scary, scary stuff. And we all know in Aliens 2, they go to a mining colony way out in space, and of course, undercover, come up after going down in the bowels of this building, they find aliens. Now, I'm going to try and tie this in as best as I can with Sudbury and aliens. With all the mining activities that are going on there, has there ever been anything outside of the norm that has been either dug up, an artifact, or anything like that, to your knowledge?
Not around Sudbury, but I did hear of a fascinating story, very short, mind you, about the tar sands in Alberta.
Sure, go ahead, please.
Yeah. In the early 80s, and I was lucky enough to hear about this on the radio, and then soon after, I had my recorder set on the station. Basically, the tar sands are being sort of filtered to suck up as much, if you want to call it sucking up, as much of the oil that's trapped in the sands of Alberta.
Yeah.
And in the early 80s, I'm assuming it's close proximity to the time that this thing aired, and I have a short clip on my site about it, as a matter of fact, where they unearthed a very unusual object that was buried in the tar sands. It looked like it was 2 meters wide, looked like a giant crater surface ball, like a giant golf ball with a tail on it. And they tried to dent it or get into it with a sledgehammer, and they couldn't even make a dent. And that's all there is. Either somebody called it in and it was carted off somewhere,
and the story fell off the radar, so to speak, completely.
No one has heard about it since. And so, yeah.
In your vast knowledge, has there ever been anything reported that has been similar in context as that?
Other than the crash retrievals, there is, if you're talking about tunneling or mining, I did hear this one story where this one guy was an engineer, and he was doing a job for the Air Force, I think, or whoever was tunneling. In the States, I believe they're trying to tunnel to interlink all the underground facilities.
I see.
And as odd as it sounds, the Air Force own their own tunneling machine. It's a tunnel tunnel boring TBMs, tunnel boring machines. And how do I know this? Is actually I was lucky enough to find a picture of a tunnel boring machine that has the Air Force logo on the side. Now, what the hell is the Air Force doing underground when they're usually supposed to be in the air?
Way above the ground.
So this one engineer, his name was Phil Schneider. He passed away a few years back. Actually, he was found dead. From what his story seems to be relating is that he was an engineer. I don't know if it was structural engineer or somebody looking to tunnel for the Air Force, and he happened to on this opening that led to a large cavernous area that as soon as he was brought down on the rope or was led down on the rope, turns out that the place was already infested with alien creatures. So he was pulled up pretty quick. Actually, he was shot at, or something was shot at him. And ever since that time, like, until his death,
right.
They've tried to silence him so that he wouldn't come clean with what he had found. I mean, it would be no surprise to me that if the aliens are here and if they're as, we think about economics almost all the time. When you're traveling somewhere, you want to make sure you have enough money for gas, so you're not going to be wasting extra amounts of mileage for the gas amount that you have. Mm-hmm. So if the aliens are economy-minded that way, to me it seems to make more sense that they would have underground and underwater installations here to keep a close eye on us rather than having to travel back 32 light years to their own planet or wherever they come from and travel back and forth. Now, you
just said something very frightening and ominous to me.
Yeah.
To keep an eye on us.
Yeah, well, it's an entirely new, entirely other ball of wax, that one. I think it ties into the abduction phenomena, why that is taking place. That's my own opinion, is that I firmly believe now that they've had a hand in our creation and that the abductions is the way by which they monitor our development to see what we're going to do next, whether we're going to blow ourselves up, fool around with nuclear power more than we already have, which obviously, if you look to Japan right now, it's exactly what would result from us not knowing how to handle nuclear power properly.
That's a good point. Especially
placing nuclear power plants on a fault line, or at least an area that's known to be earthquake prone, or even worse than that. We have become extremely stupid in the way that we handle nuclear power. We know how to produce it, but we do not know how to render it to bring it down to a level where it's no longer, or its non-toxicity exists, you know?
Let me run this by you, Michel, because Kathleen Martin was on the show last week, and I know you know who that is. That's Betty and Barney Hill's niece.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's a sweetheart of a woman. And, we talked extensively about abductions and things. Now, you just touched on something, and we've touched on this before. The reason they showed up, we both feel, is because we started to play with the matches. In other words, nuclear technology, nuclear weapons. And we have the potential now to make a big problem in the universe. I mean, if we implode our planet, that's going to make a big problem, a domino effect right across the universe without question. So I understand when you say they're coming to keep an eye on us. Is it possible, and this is just pure speculation and for entertainment, folks, okay? Keep that in mind. Is it possible when we're abducted, when people are abducted, they're tweaking us to take that aggression out of us?
I would like to think so, but I think the tweaking has been going on for a long time.
Long time.
See, people who, you know what? I don't beat around the bush. So let's say the religious people who follow the Bible to the letter,
It's like
basically
Fright,
believe
baby.
that,
Say whatever you want to. Go for it.
you know, they basically believe that we've been around for 10,000 years or less.
Or less.
In some places, maybe 5,000 years. The problem is, we've now discovered a city, Göbekli Tepe, which was built 12,000 years ago, and for some unknown reason, or at least now I think we're trying to figure out why, but 11,000 years ago, 1,000 years later, after it was built 12,000 years ago, it was somehow purposely buried in order to protect it from whatever catastrophe was apparently happening in North America at that time, 11,000 years ago.
So where is the city? Where is the city they've just built?
It's in Turkey. Göbekli Tepe.
Of course. Okay. Yeah.
So, but there's also indications, or there's a good chance, there's evidence now that the aliens may have been here for at least 270 million years. So just to say that, you know, they may have been here long before the proto-humans appeared. Maybe we were seeded here. Maybe every life form that we know today has been transplanted here from someplace else. After, of course, once the Earth cooled down, after its initial creation. Sure. But maybe we're a lab to them. Maybe we're an experiment. I know that a lot. You know, it's a big shock. It would be a big shock to the system. And, you know, never mind just a basic everyday sighting that I've had and some of my friends have had. I mean, I've got friends now that used to be skeptical before they had their own sighting. You know, that sightings are like a little tiny nano fraction of this big pill we have to swallow of all this other information that's coming in now that we have to start accepting, or we just internally and externally just shut off everything we have, all our sensory organs, and just simply bury our heads in the sand and say, this is not happening. I don't want to know about it. And the thing is, like it or not, we have to know about it. If you know, maybe it adds more questions, unanswered questions to the already existing non-answered questions that we have about the universe, where we are heading to, where we came from, which we still don't know to this day. I mean, we're guessing with about evolution, but it doesn't explain creatures such as Bigfoot. Doesn't explain which one of that is the missing link, if that even comes into play. But I think the tweaking is the missing link. You know, if whatever proto-human was here before, it was tweaked over time to become us, so that the aliens can use us for what? Trades, genetic material. I mean, you could go across the board and come up with all kinds of explanations as to why we've been put here, or created, or developed. You know, it just every time I think I know everything, I realize I know nothing at all, because there's always these discoveries that are being made by very, very reputable and reliable investigative reporters, which is something lacking in the media department, because the media, of course, is bought out. You know, the New York Times is bought out. The Washington Post is bought out. You ask them to do a reputable story on UFOs, and they'll mention little green men. The same story over and over again, where it's all laughable. It's a big freaking joke.
I know.
And none of this stuff is happening for real.
Listen,
well,
I've got Ted Sorensen. You want to talk about credible? I've got Ted Sorensen confirming conspiracy in the JFK assassination, and I can't get one goddamn newspaper in Canada to report it. So you don't have to tell me. That's Ted Sorensen, folks, JFK speechwriter.
And yet I have the documents. You know what? JFK was actually murdered because of UFOs.
Well, let's talk about that.
Yeah. You see, I have friends at work, and I've mentioned this to them, and they say, I'm freaking nuts. JFK was killed because he wanted to pull out of Vietnam. And I said, you know what? Vietnam is down here, down by your ankles. UFO secrecy is way up above the rooftops.
Okay, interesting theory.
You know?
Yeah.
UFOs is still classified higher. It rates higher than the H-bomb secrets.
That's right.
You know? So the thing is, it's like if the president was going to release stuff, and he actually was discussing outer space affairs with the Russian premier just 10 days before his assassination.
Yeah, Khrushchev, yeah.
And I have the documents where JFK was interested in releasing documents. His brother Robert was always there to protect his big brother, not wanting for him to stir any shit. And apparently, Alan Dulles is actually the one who ordered his death, because in the document, it basically says that Lancer, which was JFK's top Secret Service nickname.
That's right, yeah. And Lace was Jackie's, by the way, folks.
He was going to do something that went against the policy of the secret group that's in charge of the UFO secrecy, and they did not want that.
That secret group, is that pulled from various parts of the CIA, various parts of the FBI, various parts of the NSA?
I'm not sure, unless we're talking MJ-12. If we're talking MJ-12, then I guess Alan Dulles was part of MJ-12 somehow over time, because the original group, of course, died off. The last member died off in 1986, and only after that were the MJ-12 documents released. And
is there some kind of vehicle in place now that has taken over from MJ-12 and continued that legacy?
Yeah,
it's hard to pin down, I guess, isn't it?
Well, I'm beginning to believe now. Well, believe it's more than a belief. It looks to me like since the corporations, the elite, the people with the money, are actually the ones in power and not the government. They are the ones, or somebody within that group, that's actually in charge of the secrecy. And no matter what we try to do, it's just like the military. I mean, we'd love to find out what's at Area 51 or Area S4 where Bob Lazar worked or whatever. Sure. But the thing is, unless, see, I know for a fact that civilians outnumber the military by 10,000s to 1. So the only thing is if we weren't so lazy and sitting on our ass all day, if we were to aid Area 51, we'd have no problem pushing them back and finding out what the hell is going on. Because our taxpayers' money is paying for the military and having these fancy toys so they can go and invade another country that there's nothing there for us to go to war for, seemingly.
Does Canada have an Area 51 or something similar that we keep our top secret? I had Paul Hellyer on the show, and, fans of the show will know Paul Hellyer is the ex-Canadian defense minister. And he told me right on air, he said he believes there's a fully intact Arrow aircraft at Area 51. The Arrow aircraft, folks, was top-secret aircraft. It was top-notch, ahead of anything of its time in the 50s, and the whole program was just scuttled. For whatever reason, and there's a big conspiracy there, and I don't want to go into that right now, but does Canada have anything that's comparable to an Area 51 where we would keep top-secret aircraft, top-secret weapons, if you will?
I don't think we do, but I did hear rumors that there is a facility somewhere up north. I don't know if it's in the province of Manitoba, but it's owned by the U.S., and they can only get in there by flying in. And,
wow.
It's rumors, or at least indications that I've been told by different sources, or that I heard from other sources, whether it was online or the indication that there was a facility, not necessarily with buildings maybe, but definitely an airstrip where they would fly in, and for some reason, whether there's paranormal activity going on there, kind of like the Skinwalker Ranch down there, used to be owned by Bigelow or whatever. But there's Canada itself. We're not leaders in that department. We're more like followers. If we were to have anything happen here, I think a crash retrieval or whatever, the states would step in and recover whatever object we would find. And we'd have no say-so, because it's some kind of an unwritten rule that even in Russia, or maybe not necessarily Russia, but who knows, if there's a crash that occurs somewhere, anywhere on this planet, the U.S. seems to have supreme authority to go and recover
the object. Retrieval. In October 1967, Shag Harbor in Nova Scotia, Did they ever
Yeah.
dredge Shag Harbor to find out if they could get that alien spacecraft? For those of you that aren't unfamiliar with this story, October 1967, of course, a bunch of kids were out drinking along along the lakeshore, the ocean front, and an aircraft streamed overhead, a saucer type of aircraft, and crashed into a bay. A harbor, if you will, and went underwater, and foam came up. And the next thing, because we're at the height of the Cold War, right, 1967, we had missile ships on their way. We had all kinds of aircraft carriers. I mean, all hell broke loose to try and figure out what this thing was. And there was rumors that there was bodies caught and floating. They call it, quote unquote, Canada's Roswell. That's a good synopsis for now. But back to the question: do you know if they ever recovered anything from that crash, and where it would have gone?
I think they might have recovered some. They might have recovered some pieces of shrapnel or something. But if one UFO had some problems, the second one that showed up was there to help it repair itself. I've heard several cases like that where a UFO lands for emergency repairs, and then a secondary UFO would land next to it and help fix it. As a matter of fact, I think that's what happened on Manitoulin Island, because I couldn't explain why there were two landing traces side by side, 16 feet apart.
Yeah, let's talk about that case. Manitoulin Island, folks. Go ahead. Tell them where Manitoulin Island is, and it's isolated, and it's a native reserve.
Yeah, but first with Shag Harbor, it turns out that the objects probably left the area eventually after a while, but they were tracked under the ocean for a while too. And I've heard a lot of cases where they've seen UFOs dive into the ocean off the coast of Newfoundland and resurface around the Bermuda Triangle.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, way back when. But
some kind of portal or something.
Well, see, these objects can do things our own objects can't do. Like the only thing I've seen, come from, or that I know of, coming from another object that is submerged is a Trident missile coming out of a submarine. But you won't see the Trident missile then, reverse its course and come back and land in the silo it just left from in the submarine. But UFOs, though, they can submerge themselves, and they can dive off, come out of the ocean, fly off into the air, land right through an ice pack or land on the ice pack. I've heard stories where a gigantic hole in the ice in a frozen lake up north was discovered quite a few years back, and nobody actually went back to see what was at the bottom of that lake, but something obviously perfectly circular actually sat there or actually went in. So there's so many things we don't know. Now, Manitoulin Island was a landing case report that I initially got from one of the local radio stations, and it was reported at that time as being crop circles because some photographs had been taken. Well, all I managed to get initially was a strip of negative that had 4 photographs, and I couldn't really clearly see what was on there until I had it developed. And so I had in my mind, it's going to be a crop circle pattern. Turned out that the area was actually limestone, a clearing of limestone covered with 3/4-inch gravel, and the clearing itself was about 80 to 90 feet across. And what they initially thought was crop circles, because the show they were talking about, or the topic they were talking about on the radio show, was crop circles. It turned out that they were, I looked at the photos once they were developed, and says, this is not a crop circle pattern. We're talking about a physical trace. Something sat down. And in the picture, the gravel is blown away, leaving these, what I call 2 circular or donut-shaped indentations. They're not really indentations. It's just, you could see the limestone surface where the gravel was blown away in donut formation-like areas. And I only got to go there the following year in June 91. This had happened in mid-September 1990, right after the provincial elections at that time, and they survived one winter. I went there in June of 91.
It survived the whole winter. That I'm surprised to hear.
survived the whole winter, meaning that when you got on site, you saw the two circles. I got clear pictures of them that were taken by local residents that were there, who eventually, I guess, were the same people who gave me the strip of negative. The circles were 16 feet apart from center to center, so they were close proximity to each other. And what I found peculiar was, even though I couldn't see any residue or glue or something that would lead me to believe that something had been laid down to solidify the sand with the gravel on the top of the limestone surface, there was nothing there, but you had to use a scraper to scrape it off. And it was like that. The second time around I went there was was
it like it was melted?
No, there's no scuffing. Okay. Well, there is scuffing. I think I couldn't understand initially why they said it was a gravel pit, because there was no pit at all. And we're talking like hard limestone surface with a gravel layer on top. But traffic was going through there in order to access a gravel pit further into the bush.
Okay. And
somebody says, well, it looks to me like these two donuts might have been done by not a quad, but by then, at that time, maybe a three-wheeler, before they were found to be unsafe, and then they were making four-wheel quads.
I don't know, Michel. I've seen the pictures. I didn't get that from it at all. This doesn't look terrestrial. This looks extraterrestrial.
And the obvious thing is when you go on the location, I said, okay, well, if it's a fake, if it's a hoax, why the hell wasn't it not made right next to the main road where it could be seen?
Yeah, precisely.
Because somebody wanting to have that kind of notoriety would place it where it was in plain sight, but this was not in plain sight. We're talking about a dirt road. Well, dirt road is overgrown with grass, like almost 2-foot tall grass, leading into the bush. Leading into the bush, and you traveled quite a ways, like I'd say maybe quarter mile, maybe a mile in the bush, until you got to this clearing, which was completely surrounded by trees. So all you saw from the main road was a clump of trees in the distance. And so you couldn't see the landing site from the main road. There's no way. It was a perfect clearing for anything to land. And apparently we talked to Mr. Misselbrook, Keith Misselbrook, he's passed away now, but his house was the only house maybe just 50 feet away from the entrance to that road, in that little dirt road or whatever, trail, I should say, in the woods, who lived there. And first he was apprehensive about talking to me. He thought maybe I was working for the government, because it turned out that his son was in the Air Force, Canadian Air Force.
I see.
And he had a breathing problem, and he said he was up at night at 4 o'clock in the morning, and he remembers, or he said that what he thought he saw was two lights descending straight down into that clearing the night before that this circle was found. So we're talking like almost a year and a half to 2 years later, that I actually talked to this so-called witness.
Did he see any ETs or anything like that?
No, he didn't see anything at all. Just the two lights descending, and then they went behind the trees. So this was June 91. I went back. The last time I went was in the fall of 93, and they were still visible. The fog was rolling in. It was late in the afternoon, 5 o'clock. I said, it's time to head back to Sudbury, because I didn't want to get caught driving home in the dark. And not that I would get lost, because there's only one way onto the island, one way out. So you can't get lost going on the island. You can't get lost at all. So I in total, I think I went there 3 times, and the last time I went, I think I may have gone there four or 5 times. I went there. The last time was with Matthew Fish, who was supposedly. He's been busy doing his home renos, but he's a filmmaker who moved out of Sudbury to join his girlfriend in Ottawa, and he's working. He still plans to work and finish up the biography he's doing on me for Cinefest Film Festival in Sudbury. Actually, he wants to, hopefully, once he gets it done, if he gets it done, it'll be at several film festivals. It's my biography, apparently. And I thought, well, don't you have to be dead in order for somebody to do biography? So anyways, let's hope not.
It's titled UFO Man.
Yeah. Supposedly, yeah, based on my license plate. So anyways, yeah, we went there again. And that time I actually had taken a broom. Either that time or the time before then, I actually had taken a broom with me. And by then, whatever was holding the sand and the gravel on top of the limestone surface was no longer there. There was no such effect. I swept everything with the broom, and everything came off. I mean, it just, the gravel, the circles were long gone by then, or covered in or whatever, due to rain or snow. But when I swept, everything came off. Initially, when I had swept the loose gravel, when you got to the what I call the dirt mound in the middle of the donut-shaped indentations and the outer perimeter, like I said, it was so stuck on there, it didn't have the same effect as dried mud. There was dried mud there before as well, but you could tell the difference because you had to literally scrape that stuff off with a scraper, you know, that a plasterer would use to plaster a wall or something, right? Mm-hmm. So I found it really, really peculiar. There was no residue there. I never took samples of the sand and gravel, but
you don't have
samples.
Do you, Michel?
Mine is outdated, and I actually contacted, oddly enough, Bob Lazar, made famous or infamous for having come out of Area 51 or Area S4, where he claims to have worked on a flying saucer. He has a company named called United Nuclear, and he actually makes Geiger counters.
Oh my goodness!
A more modern version. Yeah, so I'm actually trying to purchase one from him because the one I have, he basically wrote me back, or someone from that company wrote me back, his company, that said that my Geiger counter has to be in very close proximity to a very large source of radiation, and if it goes off, your life is in immediate danger.
Oh my God!
But the model of the Geiger counter that I have is an older model. It was given to me by a couple of researchers from down south near Mississauga.
Okay.
And so I never did have instruments with me when I was there on Manitoulin, but I just found it odd that after 3 years, all of a sudden the gravel could come right off the limestone surface without sticking to it. And I do have samples of the rock because there was cracks and some parts of the limestone came off. So as a souvenir, I took some of the limestone pieces with me. The owner of the property only came across the circles. He was checking his property once a week, and it was just a quarter mile outside of Spring Bay. So it was very, very, very seldom there was any traffic there, although he claimed that traffic was going through to go to the gravel pit, which we never did go to or find or whatever. I couldn't see. I mean, there was sand mounds that was overgrown with grass and trees surrounding the 80-foot wide clearing, but I wouldn't have
you have
called it a
pictures
gravel
of this
pit.
on your website as well, don't you, Michel? Yeah. So people, folks, if you're listening, just go to the website, newforest.com, and again, www.nightfrightshow.com. Just click on Michel Deschamps' picture, who's our guest tonight, and then it'll take you right to a spot. Now, Manitoulin Island, obviously it's an island. It's a beautiful, beautiful. There's sandy beaches everywhere. Every which way you turn around, there's a sandy beach. Michel is quite correct. There is two ways onto the island, actually. First, you can swim there. No, I'm kidding. You can't swim there. There's a ferry that will ferry you over to Manitoulin Island from Parry Sound, if I'm not mistaken. And the other way is a bridge.
Yeah.
And it's a swing bridge. Now, what's unique about Manitoulin Island is it's a native First Nations person reserve. And I'm going to ask you, Michel, there's something very magical between the dynamic and relationship between First Nation folks and ETs. There always has been. We think of the Hopi Indians, of course, in the United States. Indigenous folks right around the world seem to be more in tune. Is that much the same thing with Manitoulin Island?
Yeah, actually. Well, I don't know if they're doing anything, today. But I did speak to, never got a chance to speak with the elders, but I did speak with a young lady that works at the band office, and she told me about her grandfather having had a sighting. And at that time, when Matthew Fish, the filmmaker I mentioned earlier, was working with Greg Tremblay, Greg Tremblay had actually, for a while anyways, he had branched off. When Matthew Fish moved to Ottawa, Greg Tremblay moved to the island and had a small film company there. He's still doing film. And he was less of a skeptic than Matthew Fish and more of a believer. And he was astonished at how many UFO reports he was hearing left and right when he was there.
Wow.
So history of UFOs and Native people, it's in their folklore. It goes way, way back. I wouldn't be surprised if there's pictograms or pictographs somewhere depicting UFOs. I know the Hopi Indians, they found there were pictographs that were found in the United States, southwestern states, where UFOs are depicted seemingly. UFOs have been depicted in cave paintings.
Yeah, I was going to say
so,
especially in oral history lore.
Yeah.
Yeah, Sky people.
And those drawings are not like, fantasy tales. That was the only way they could record any happenings of their time. Anything they saw, they would paint. They were not making up stories like we do today, writing fictional books or whatever. Although that's what the skeptics would say.
Michel, do you have any lectures coming up? Any new lecture series? I know you just did one.
Well, actually, I was invited to speak in front of the Astronomy Club of Sudbury at the Laurentian University, and I was better received than I expected. Although one astronomer, one of the older guys there, actually said, well, he says, I put up a good argument, but he says, I still don't see the physical evidence. I need proof. And it's funny because once I got home, the one who warned me that maybe I'd get, pummeled by a bunch of tomatoes was Chris Rutkowski of Manitoba, he's an astronomer himself, and out of the University of Manitoba, and he's the one, although a skeptic, he's the one who puts out the annual survey on the previous year's sightings in Canada. Like, for instance, all the sightings for 2014 will come out either February or March of next year in his annual survey. Well, anyways, I mentioned this to him that, this is one astronomer who wanted the physical evidence. He said, well, you should have asked him. So, okay, well, give me the physical evidence for a black hole or physical evidence for next week's weather report, which I said, well, the weather report probably wouldn't work, but what about neutrinos? We have one of 3 neutrino labs in all of the world.
Here in Sudbury.
At Creighton Mine. And neutrinos are invisible particles, or they're so tiny that apparently they can pass through any matter. And I think this collector they have there, the SNO, Sudbury Neutrino Observatory, is supposed to be able to track them or to count them as they go by. Well, I should have asked them. I says, what's the physical evidence for neutrinos or physical evidence for black holes? We have more physical evidence for UFOs than they do in any of their, their subjects that they're trying to study. So, and it's an argument that can easily be won. I mean, I have documents. I don't have a piece of a ship or an alien body to show. God forbid I wouldn't shoot one to show, but if there were to be an accident and where I did recover a dead body, well, there's a few people that I would show it to, and maybe astronomers would be the very first one to just say right in their faces, here, told you so, or whatever. But I don't even think that would convince them, and yet.
Well, Sudbury's got a huge connection as well, Michel, with space, because during the Apollo missions, Apollo astronauts in '73 came up to Sudbury to practice their moonwalks and how to react on the moon and things like that, because the rock formations are very similar in Sudbury to what they were to be encountering on the moon.
At that time, it was really moon rock is what people call this place. Now it's getting a little bit better with the greenery.
Yeah.
They finally did land reclamation and planting trees and stuff, so it doesn't look as black as it used to. Yeah, it's a beautiful spot. You got a lake every 3 feet, by the way, there, folks.
I'm not kidding. There's, 7 lakes in the greater Sudbury area, and beautiful, gorgeous, clean, stunningly beautiful lakes.
Well, I wouldn't say Ramsey Lake is clean. You know where? I've been
swimming in Ramsey. That's where all the tailings go.
No. If I want to swim, I'll go to Providence Bay on Manitoulin Island. That's my spot.
That's your
because it's sandy bottom, it's clear water. You can see clear down, and it's waist high for at least a quarter mile. You can walk a long ways, and it's still at waist high. So it's like, wow, and it's nice and warm. So, and it's cleaner than Lake Ramsey. So yeah, I wouldn't. I know that we have a main beach and we have a secondary beach at Lake Ramsey, but I wouldn't swim in there. God no. But UFOs have been seen around that lake. UFOs have been seen coming up from the bottom. People have seen lights. At one spot, I was told it was 180 feet.
Wow.
Closest to the entrance to Laurentian University, as a matter of fact.
So there must be caverns.
And I've seen UFOs over Lake Ramsey. I know other people that have had daytime sightings over Lake Ramsey. But I've seen one. I've seen one over Lake Ramsey, so I'm not surprised that they're around. Yeah, the mines is one attraction, but also you look around the natural resources. It's a good vacationing spot. Maybe they like to come here for vacation. Taking a break from between abductions. It's like, let's leave the humans alone for a little while. Let's go take a little breather on the side of a lake or something.
And I'm gonna let the world in on a little known fact that Sudbury, Ontario, has the most Tim Horton coffee shops per capita in the whole world.
Per capita.
Yeah. Isn't that incredible? Right? So maybe they come there for the coffee. Who knows? Okay, Michel, we're back on the Trans-Canada Highway. There's nothing around for miles. You're in the middle of nowhere. A light comes out of the sky and it starts following you along the highway. What do you do?
That's when the heebie-jeebies kick in. Because you can't outrun or outdrive these things.
Well, exactly. And this is what I'm trying to figure out. There must be truck drivers listening right now, and be safe out there, folks. Be safe. But they must have run into experiences like this where something weird has happened, and perhaps a light from the sky has been following them. What's their best course of action? I guess not to panic and just continue along, right?
If they can. I know one particular story was, as a matter of fact, I think it was UFO Don Campbell from formerly Ovinco, now Ballet it's called now, Ballet.
Still the mining company.
He was driving, I think him and his wife were driving west, and they were behind transport trucks, and the transport trucks all of a sudden stopped because they could see something that just flew right across the highway. And so I'm not surprised. I mean, even our own trucks. I work for Walmart, and our trucks are making their way up here from Toronto. And I've talked to a few drivers, and they've seen stuff. And so I'm not surprised because they drive at all hours of the night,
In all kinds of conditions too.
It's just for those people. It's just it's a question of where to report the sightings if they don't know where to report the sightings. Don't report them to the cops. They won't do anything at all unless except from keeping you on the phone long enough to determine whether you're nuts or not. And that's what they did with me. So I've never reported my sightings to the police after that one.
I guess it was the same fear that pilots go through about reporting things, because virtually every pilot I've ever spoke to off air has had something weird happen, and they've seen something or something strange has flown by. But they can't report it, of course, because once they do, then they're ostracized. And, do you really want a pilot that sees UFOs? But virtually every pilot has. So I guess it's the same type of thing,
Yeah. Well, like when TVO flew me down to Toronto for actually was supposed to be for just 1 day interview or a 5-minute interview on a Friday. This was in the early 90s sometime. And anyways, to make a long story short, I wound up staying there for the whole weekend because we had a MUFON table there at one time. And that's how I met my web host and friend, Errol Bruce Knapp, who was an original pirate radio broadcaster.
Isn't that fascinating?
and Tom Theophanis and his wife Lise, who's French-Canadian. He's Greek. I met them there, and I wound up staying for the whole weekend. But anyways, when I was flying down to Toronto, I spoke to the stewardess and told them who I was. And this is in the early days. I mean, I was not as vocal as I am now. Mm-hmm. And she said, well, I'll go and talk to the pilot. I gave her my card or whatever card I had at that time. And she came back and she told me that the pilot found this very interesting. And I later found out, either it was through her or through somebody else, security guard at the airport, but every single pilot, or at least a majority of the pilots that fly out of Sudbury, has, at one time or another, seen something unusual in the sky.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And the funny thing is...
Sure, please.
And the funny thing is, at that Sudbury airport, I don't know if it's still there anymore. I've been looking for it. But anyways, it's so weird now. It's changed. There's nobody in the control tower. The flights are now controlled from Sault Ste. Marie, which is odd.
Really?
And the Department... Huh. The Department of Transport used to have their own building there. Well, the Department of Transport, before the National Research Council used to collect UFO reports, it was the job and the business of the Department of Transport to collect UFO reports. Way back when. And to find the fact that the Department of Transport had an office or a building at the airport, and the airport was in line of sight with the Falconbridge radar base. They were both at the tops of two leveled off mountain tops, I guess you could call it. Not really mountains, since I've been to Alberta. And what we have are the foothills of the foothills. But the radar base used to be visible from the airport tarmac in line of sight. And so the airport must have captured lots of UFOs on their own particular radar or whatever. And to have the Department of Transport right there seems kind of odd. Maybe not, because they're part of transportation and aircraft falls into that category, but still, it's just weird that it kind of all ties in together. And now, the fact that
there's a lot of folks listening right around the world, primarily North America. If they have sightings, can they contact you just to let them know? Let you know that what they have seen, and is there a criteria they should follow?
You know what? I don't even have a submission form. I'm basically, I've been reduced, I guess, or I've reduced myself to just being an archivist right now until the website's pretty well complete. I can't wait. I was just recently asked to do some field investigative work with Michel McKay.
I know Michel. Sure.
Yeah.
She's a ghost hunter, folks. She's a sweetie.
It's funny because when I was heading towards my parents, who live in Gatineau, just on the other side of the river from Ottawa, Matthew Fish and I had been driving down, and we decided to make a detour and see if we couldn't locate a famous landing site on, well, the English translation would be Match Island, but it's Ile Allumette, and it's on the other side of Pembroke on the Quebec side, and it was a famous landing case in 1969. And although the scenery looked similar, the trees looked similar, I don't think we were exactly where it happened, but we were close, I felt. Anyways, Michelle wants me to tag along to go and see if we can't locate the site, because apparently her late uncle as files on that particular case.
Wow.
So to be back in the field, looking at a landing site, talk about getting EBGBs. When you get to actually be standing in the middle of an actual location where something unusual happened, you do get the hairs of the back of your neck stand right up, and you feel like it's almost like ominous, like it's almost as if you don't belong there or you shouldn't be there, even long after the fact. It's really weird. So I did get the weird feeling when I was there, because I was pins and needles, all combined with a little bit of fear, and saying, wow, what to actually be at a landing site. So there's excitement in the air mixed in with all these other emotions, and it's like, wow, there's nothing like it. So to be rendered from, having to work on the website and being like, I wouldn't say armchair researcher, because I obviously know my stuff, but we do this voluntarily. So to be able to have the funds to do this, put gas in the car and travel miles and miles and miles, I mean, it doesn't come easy. I work a full-time job, but sometimes I wish that, maybe I did have a little nest egg somewhere I could just do this. Or, what if I retired? I don't even see ever that happening, but if I ever do retire, I'm going to try to spend as much time to actually go out in the field and investigate things, hopefully rack up enough money so I can buy my instruments, like, a more modern day version of a Geiger counter, electromagnetic field detector, infrared camera maybe, because it's known now that, it's known now that infrared, a lot of UFOs may be hovering in the sky as we speak, and they're only spotted in infrared spectrum. Our naked eyes can't spot them. So
sure, thanks for that. Now I'm looking outside my studio to see if there's anybody looking in. Thanks for that, buddy.
But I have to say, it would be interesting to find out exactly how many objects are hovering, just observing us.
I think I could do without that. No, it's okay. I don't need to know these big eyes are looking at me. Thanks a lot. All of a sudden, I feel like I should put the lights on in the studio and close the curtains or something.
Or maybe now you're under the microscope.
Yeah. We've only got a few minutes left, and I want to thank Kelly Logue so much. Sometimes sometimes we just run out of time and the music starts because I never know when the music's going to start because it's all automated. But give or take, it's usually around the 56-minute mark, and we're almost there now. I want to thank Kelly Logue. Thank you so much, my friend. He lives in Alaska, Juneau, Alaska. He puts my complete website together for me. Every week he puts the shows up, week after week after week, and it's a tedious, unthankful job, and I just want to say that thank you so, so very much because I couldn't do the show without your input, and you're a super trooper, my friend. Thank you so much, and keep writing that book. He's working on a book as well, folks, and I read a little bit out of it. Get ready to be scared out of your minds because he's a damn good writer, and I'll get him on the show as soon as he wants. Michel, will you keep me posted, please, when you do go for that investigation? Maybe I could meet you there, and we could do a live show from there. This is in the back of my mind because it's not far from Kingston. That's the beauty about Kingston, Michel. I'll tell you. You're like 2 hours from Toronto, 2 hours from Montreal, an hour and a half from Syracuse, and an hour and a half from Ottawa. I mean, it's great. You're right in the center of it all, and they're all drivable and doable within a day. So unlike the 7 or 8 or 9 hour drive between Sudbury and Montreal. So please do keep me posted on that. I want to thank you so much for coming on the show, folks. www.nightfrightshow.com. Click on tonight's guest picture, Michel Deschamps. That'll take you right to his website, which is newfors.com, NOUFORS.com. And it's just been a total pleasure. You're going to find all kinds of stuff there, folks. It is a wealth and a resource that well worth checking out. Any final words, my friend?
I miss doing radio. I love doing my radio, live or pre-recorded, but it's,
there's the music. This was live tonight, by the way, Michel. But I miss having you in studio as well. And we'll see what we can do about that.
Yeah.
Thanks again, everybody. I'm Brent Holland from Night Fright. Thank you, Michel Deschamps. Good night, everybody.
Take care.
Be safe.